we're recording.
All right. So today we're going to be going over risk versus reward analysis. And it's one of the most fundamental building blocks of Overwatch, especially when it comes to building plans, but is generally quite poorly understood. Most people don't really think about it that much. But every single time you ever come up with a plan or even do something on autopilot, you are making a risk versus reward calculation in your head, even if you don't realize it. And after this, you should be able to have a much deeper understanding of what should go into that calculation and how to do this quickly and effectively in game. So to start, we'll talk about what even is reward. So can you guys think of, if you're trying to come up with a plan, what are some rewards that that plan could give you? There's one
Reward.
really obvious one.
Well, you kill the person. That's the most obvious.
Yep, kill. You get a kill. That's the most obvious one. I'm going to jump that Ana and she's going to die. Simple. That's the most obvious one. But there's, of course, more complicated things. Can you think of anything a little bit more in depth than just get a kill?
Well,
Take space.
yep.
What was that?
Take space.
Yep, make space. That is the most common one here, really, in any plan you're gonna make, because you can't always guarantee a kill, but you can generally guarantee being able to take space. Some other ones that you can get out are enemy cooldowns. You can just damage a person, because if you damage someone, that puts them at risk of getting killed later, or means it's forced to heal them. You get ult charge for yourself, which isn't worth terribly much, but can be worth some. And you can also capture the point, right? That's another kind of one of the obvious big ones, like getting kills, where it's like, yeah, of course we want to capture the point. But it still is a reward. So understanding what rewards are is pretty simple. It's just, I want this good thing to happen. Easy. So we could use this game as a simple answer here, and we can watch. We'll see what I do on Winston here.
2,
What the play is,
1.
what the reward is.
Attackers incoming. Defend objective A.
Or what the goal of the play is. Alright. What is the reward I'm trying to achieve with this kind of a play?
You're trying to hold space.
I probably can't hold this space. It's a little bit too deep.
Well,
I would call this a soft dive. And what's the point of a soft dive?
I would just say you're trying to make them kind of pick between either shooting at you or shooting at your team.
Yeah, that's good. That's a big part of it. The main reward I'm trying to get is I'm trying to take space by baiting them to drop back from me. But if they just shoot at me instead, that works as well. That still is taking attention, and attention is a form of taking space. And we'll see if I get that reward. I do. He drops back from me, they drop back from me, and now I have opened up the space for my team to push in on. They're no longer being contested. They can get to this high ground for kind of a slow comp, so it's not ideal, but still. The space was taken. That was the reward that was achieved here. I get a little bit of damage too. I bait out a cooldown, but the main reward is the space that I get. But we talk about reward, but we're forgetting half the equation, which is risk. So there are many risks that could be associated with a play. All right, we talked about what the rewards are. So what are risks that you can achieve? There's again one very obvious one.
Death.
Yes, death. That's the biggest risk. You can just die. What are some other risks?
Maybe a wasted cooldown.
Yep, burning cooldown, so you don't need it. Yeah, or even if you don't need it, even if you did need it, wasting the cooldowns. Here, I use my bubble. I need my bubble. I used it for good reason, but I lost my bubble. That is a risk. That is a thing that happened that is negative. I wanted to have that cooldown for longer, of course. You always want to have all your cooldowns. Some other ones are losing space, obviously. So, for example, Let's see what a good example of this would be. We'll watch from the hazard's point of view here, actually. If I go back to here. So this hazard, he has to pick between some risks. I guess I'll read through the whole list and I'll talk about an example here. So losing space is a big risk. Your teammates dying is also a big risk, especially if you're playing tank or support. You have to make plays that are considering the life of your teammates. If you're playing Brig and you're standing next to your Ana, she's pretty safe. But if you see a Tracer off in the distance and you go chase down the Tracer for 1v1, maybe you win the 1v1, but maybe in the meantime the Ana gets jumped by the Winston and Genji and she dies. And that's a risk you need to consider for that. Burning cooldowns, like Derek said, you could use a cooldown. Whether you wasted it or whether it was for a good use, losing that cooldown is still a risk. Demanding resources from supports. This is another big one for tank, is that all of the damage you take, your supports are going to have to heal it. And that's going to take time away from them being able to do damage, being able to take their own space, or being able to heal your other teammates. Giving enemies ult charge. This is a kind of a minor one, but it does still matter. And lastly, of course, losing the point. You don't want to lose the point. You want to win the game. So now to talk about this example here. This hazard, he decides to drop back, right? And by doing that, he is accepting the risk of losing this space because our team can now push in on this space. But what risk is he preventing by dropping back?
Like your access to the backline.
Yeah, he's preventing his teammates from dying, or his teammates from having to lose space. He's essentially just deciding to give up the front line to protect the back line. Is it a good choice? Is it a bad choice? I don't know. It's complicated. But he's making that choice. So does everybody good on understanding what rewards are and what risks are?
Nope.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll talk about sources of risk. This is where we get into some of the meat of this. Everything I talk about now is pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy to understand. But sources of risk. This is where you should really be thinking about when you're doing calculations. So let's do this. So first I want to actually clarify something here exactly. Is that risks and rewards, that whole list that we went over, those are the things that can actually like tangibly occur, like the results of a play. Like if I jump in here and I kill the Zenyatta, that's my reward. That's what I achieve. That is the reward. If I jump in here and I get killed, that is the risk that that occurred. So the terms that I use for that is there's potential rewards or potential risks, which are things that could happen, and then realized rewards or realized risks, where something actually happened. I'll talk more about that in more detail later. But I'll talk about sources of risk now. So these are things that are either going to increase the likelihood of those risks from being realized, right? It's always possible you'll die. It's always possible you'll get a cooldown forced out. But what are the things that are going to make it more likely to happen? And these are the sources of risk. So what are sources of risk that you guys can think of off the top of your head?
Well, sources of risk would be like incoming damage that you can't mitigate or you can't block or that you can't use natural cover from.
That is a lot of it. That's a lot of it. But I want a tiny bit more than that. You're onto something. And I would call that line of sight to each enemy, right? So let's take from. I'll let this fight play out a little bit. I'll actually go to the next fight. We're not going to stand the same fight over and over and over. Let's see here. I guess I skipped too far ahead. Let's look at it from somebody's point of view who'll be good. Alright, so the fight's been won by the enemy team. And now here. This is a good example. So with where I'm playing right now, pretty much the entire team has line of sight to me. I have some cover from like maybe the M-Ray, but pretty much they can all kind of see me here. So that is a lot of line of sight from enemy team. So that's one of the main sources of risk, is how many people in enemy team can see you. But what coincides with this, and this is also very, very important, is, and the reason why this play is actually safe right now, is the proximity to the enemy team. I'm very far from these people. Emre has fall-off damage at this range, Hazard has a spread, Juno has fall-off, Zenyatta's the only one who's really in an effective range right here. And so even though they have a lot of line of sight to me, because I'm so far away, I'm going to get away with this. We can watch it play out here. Even though the whole team line of sight to me, I was far enough that I only took half my HP and I'm going to live. So proximity to enemy team, proximity to each enemy on the enemy team specifically, and line of sight to each enemy on the enemy team are two good sources of risk to keep in mind. There's a third really big one, which is the reason why I jumped away. And I have to go from my perspective, I guess, to see it clearly. But you can see the health pack is that's what I'm going to do to solve the problem, but the problem is my HP. If you have low HP, that increases your risk, obviously. The lower your HP, the higher the risk is of you dying or getting a cooldown forced out or whatever. What's another, and it's actually the reason why most people wouldn't do this play here. Most people consider this play too risky and bad. Why would most people consider this play bad?
Because you're leaving your team.
Yeah, I'm really far from my team. Really, really, really far away from it. And so distance from team is another source of risk to consider. Because the farther you are from your team, the less likely they are to be able to help you. And coinciding with this is lack of line of sight to your supports. Because most supports in the game cannot help you if they cannot see you. So even if you're playing close to a support, if they're through a wall, they can't help you. So that's another danger. Another source of risk is lack of cooldowns. If I had already burnt my bubble, going here might be too risky, because I might be able to have my bubble to protect myself. So having cooldowns is important to be able to succeed. And if you don't have cooldowns, that increases your risk, especially if you're playing something like Tracer, right? If Tracer uses recall, she essentially cannot engage for 12 seconds. She needs to wait for that cooldown because her risk increases exponentially without recall. She has so little health that if she doesn't have that recall, she can just die instantly at any point in time. Another couple sources of risk here are numbers disadvantages, right? So if we're down players, right now I technically am 1 versus 5, so that's a big source of risk. Obviously, the more enemies there are than your own teammates, that makes it harder for things to succeed. Powerful cooldowns the enemy team has is a big one to consider. So especially if you're playing against characters like Bastion or Ana, who have super impactful cooldowns, you need to really consider that whenever you're making a play. If you're deciding to take the 1v1 as Tracer versus an Ana, if you know she has her nade, that's a hard 1v1. If you know she used her nade, that's pretty easy so long as she doesn't hit the sleep on you. Ultimates are a source of risk, enemy ultimates specifically. The enemies could use an ult, you could engage, and then they Kitsune rush, and then you're out of position now and you die. It's always a risk. Enemies on off angles is also a source of risk. Not necessarily to you, always, but it could be to your teammates. I mean, honestly, I'll still use this fight as an example once it plays out a little bit further here. So they all chase me. They're paying attention to this angle, but they're not considering the risk of the enemies on this, even though it's technically a main, because of how the enemy team is positioned. This is effectively an off angle. They aren't considering the risks that the soldier prevents on the off angle, and the Zenyatta is going to die for it. So enemies on off angles can be a source of risk when you're making a play. whether you give up space to allow them to push in on the off angle, which is kind of like what happens there, or if you go in too deep, not realizing the enemy's on the off angle there, and they can pressure you and kill you. And then another source of risk here is objective pressure, right? You could end up pushing up really deep in the enemy team spawn room, and then you don't realize until it's too late that Sombra went behind and you back half the point and you lost. So that was a lot. There's a lot of sources of risk, and this is the most important part of this lecture. So I want to make sure that everyone understand sources of risk, what they mean, and does anyone have any questions about this at all?
Sounds good.
All right. And again, just to restate it, sources of risk are the things that make risks more likely to be realized. And now for the part of the lecture that is going to make you guys roll your eyes. What are sources of reward? I'll give you a hint. There's not a laundry list of things like there was for risk.
Is it just a kill?
What was that?
Is it just a kill? Like
No,
getting a kill?
no, it's more broad than that. That is too specific. Sources of reward. People aren't really going to be able to guess this because it's kind of weird. It's not what you would think. But there's only two things for this that go into sources of reward. Again, sources of risk are things that make risks more likely to be realized, which is those things. Sources of reward are the things that go into making your rewards more likely to be realized. And those two things are, one, how good is your plan? And two, how well do you execute it? Plain and simple. If you come up with, and the reason why I said this is not because I'm saying, well, I don't have to consider those things then, like cooldowns and HP, in order to come up with good plans then, because I just need to think about how good my plan is. But those things are going to go into your plan, obviously. But that's because you're always weighing the risks, right? When it comes to weighing rewards, we're mainly thinking about how good the plan is, meaning if executed properly, how likely is this plan to succeed? If it's a plan like I'm going to charge into the enemy team as Reinhardt, and they're all going to die, that plan might work 1% of the time. It's not a very good plan. Even if executed perfectly, it's not a very good plan. But if your plan is something better, like I'm going to pressure out the tank into using his defensive cooldown, and then I'm going to wait it out, then I'm going to shatter, and then we're going to push enough of that, that's a pretty good plan that'll work a good amount of the time. And then how well you execute it is, it's just in the name, how well do you and your teammates execute that plan? Obviously, if you do a better job executing it, it's more likely to succeed. If you do a worse job, it's less likely to succeed. And this is important to keep in mind because sometimes you will come up with a really good plan, but execute it poorly, and then think the plan doesn't work. But that's not true. That plan could still be a really good plan, and it could still be really good to try it again. You just might have made a mistake. Maybe your Widow just missed all of her shots, and that sucks, but maybe next fight she will hit one of her shots, and the fight's winnable then. So you have to be willing to try things, even if they don't work, so long as you're confident that the plan is actually good, which can be hard to do mid-game. You might have to do it out of game, like a VOD review or something. But yeah. So what does all this stuff we talk about mean? Every single play you make will carry risks and rewards, both potential and realized. Some of the risks will only stay potential, right? In this play that I did here, there was potential for me to die here, but I didn't. That was a potential reward. But some risks will get realized. I was forced to jump away. My jump cooldown got taken. That was a realized risk, a realized thing that we lost. A play is successful when the realized rewards outweigh the realized risks. So I'll ask this before the Zen even dies, because Zen dying was lucky. Although kind of not lucky, but let's say. I want to ask you guys' opinions here. So I'll watch back it from the start here, and we can decide if my play was successful or not. Alright, so I'm here. Alright, we lose the fight and everything. Nothing I can do about that. It's too late in the fight. But let's watch what happens. All right. We'll call it there. So first I'll ask, what was the rewards that I achieved with this play?
I would say you gave your teammates more space to like get back into the fight after they're respawned
Yeah.
by taking
Yeah.
attention.
Yeah, I took a lot of attention. I took my hazard all the way into his backline. I took away his jump. Probably some other cooldowns. I think the Ember threw a nade or two. But yeah, the big one is that the hazard is not here. My teammates get to walk for free.
And you
But
got discorded, meaning when you jumped on the Zen, you couldn't discord you
that's true.
again.
That's true. I did get Discord and break the Discord, so he can't Discord me again for another 6 seconds. I didn't think about that. That's true. That is a cooldown in a way. So those are the realized rewards. Those are the rewards that I achieved. What are the realized risks? What were the negative things that happened to me in this play? There were some.
Well, you used jump.
Did I use swivel too? I use
And maybe taking like damage can give them alt charge a little bit, but
yeah, I took a fair bit of damage. Let's see. I want to see if I use bubble here or not. I don't remember if I did it or not. Should know because I just watched it, but
no, you didn't use. I don't think you did. I think you just took some damage and hopped away.
okay, yeah. Take the damage. Yeah, well. Yeah, so I gave them ult charge. I took damage. There's a health pack there, so my sports don't have to heal that actually, which is convenient. But I gave them ult charge and I burned bubble. Or burned jump, sorry. So, I want to ask you guys now. So we know what the realized risks are. We know the negative things that happened. Taking damage, giving them ult charge, and using jump. But I want to ask, after also assessing what the realized rewards is, where we bait attention, the hazard slash, and the hazard giving up all his space running straight into the backline, do we think that this play was successful or not? Do the realized rewards outweigh the realized risks?
I would say it was successful because you stayed alive.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. I would agree. I think that the hazard giving up all that space to get back here, that's a huge sacrifice. I'm still set up on a powerful angle, or right as my teammates are coming back. This guy realistically cannot kill me by himself. Zenyatta, if he lived there, he could give pressure, but he can't live there because my teammates will pressure him out, even though he tries. So yeah, I would say this play was successful. But there's another question. So a play is successful when the realized rewards outweigh the realized risks. We talk about that. But a play is good when the potential for reward outweighs the potential for risk. And I have to clarify with this. When I say potential, I mean realistic potential,
Yeah.
right? In
Yeah,
the
it's not like
earlier
you're
example,
hopping in the back line and killing all of them.
yeah, exactly. If I say, well, I'm going to jump in and then maybe I kill them all, that's not realistic. That's not
Yeah.
likely to happen. We're only talking about things that are realistically not probable to happen, but within like at least like 30% chance of happening. If it's lower than that, that's kind of a fluke, and I don't really care. So, if we were to ask, like, if we were to travel back in time and you were to go into my brain, would you tell me to do that play? Would you tell me not to do that play? Was it a good plan or a bad plan?
Well, what's the other play? That you like stay there and fight?
The other play would probably be to drop back and regroup with my team.
From the stairs where you were?
Here, I'll go back to where I was before this all happened. So let's see. It was right here I made the decision. So at this point, it was here. Yeah, so it was here. So we're down 1 now, and my team's kind of losing this fight as far as space goes. She's about to die over here. So at this point in time, would you go into my brain and say, jump here and bait them back, or regroup with your team?
I don't know. I would say maybe if you can. Did your whole team die except
They all
you?
die. Well, they all
I-
die or get forced to spawn. We can watch it again. I think some of them run away to spawn and make it out alive, but it's a completely lost fight.
Honestly, I think you made the right play because of how far they were all up already. And so if you jump back, you might die with them.
Yeah.
With-
Yeah. I am inclined to agree. We're again ignoring the results, right? Ignoring the results, just talk about the potential risks and potential rewards. The potential risks of dropping back are quite high. We're going to lose all of our space guaranteed. It's likely that I'll die too. I mean, I'm basically going to get all my cooldowns forced out as well. I'm going to get them a lot of ult charges shooting me even if I don't die. I might get out of 1 HP, but I'll still take a lot of damage. The support's going to have to heal me the whole time if they're not already dead. And what rewards am I going to get? Well, I'm getting all my space, so I'm not taking space. I'm running away, so I'm not getting kills. Enemies might burn cooldowns to chase me, but that's it. So I would say that running back has essentially zero potential reward other than the idea would be is that if I go here, I could die later and get staggered. Whereas running back, I would die with my team and not get staggered. That's kind of the only reward of running back is to avoid stagger. But as far as potential reward here on this position, there's a lot of potential reward. I was able to get the kill on the Widow. That was kind of lucky. But I did have meaningful pressure on backline. So I had realistic chances of getting a kill or at least forcing up cooldowns and attention. I was able to bait the hazard back, so I was able to make space, and that was kind of guaranteed to happen. The whole team turned around to look at me. That was kind of guaranteed to happen. Of course they're going to do that. So there's a lot of potential reward from this. And a fair bit of risk. It's possible I could die. If the hazard hit a wall right here, that could have been the end of me. I don't think he has enough range on the wall to be able to do that, but it's possible. Yeah, I would agree that this was both a successful play and an overall good play. So that was a lot of yap, but does everyone understand the meaning and the application kind of understanding what risks and rewards are and what the sources of risks and rewards are?
I think so.
Yeah.
At least I do.
Okay. So let's talk about potential rewards, potential risks, and probability. It's kind of understanding how all this plays into it. So the list we went over, I kind of already set this up, I'll just kind of repeat this here. The lists that we went over for what are rewards are the potential rewards that you could achieve from a play. The lists that we went over for what are risks are the potential risks that you could achieve from a play. The probability of those risks or rewards being realized is influenced by the sources of risk and reward, right? So the odds of me dying is influenced by how many enemies there are that can see me, how close they are, what cooldowns they have, what cooldowns I have, how much health I have. The odds of me getting a kill are how good is my plan and how well do I execute it. Do I hit my shots? Do I not hit my shots? Is my plan stupid? Or is my plan pretty good? Each play will have a certain chance of succeeding or failing. And again, succeeding versus failing is determined by if the realized rewards outweigh the realized risks. And every single play has a percent chance of succeeding or failing. Even if it's 0.00001%, it still exists. Typically, we'll try to avoid making 0.0001% plays, but sometimes you do it. Each play will also have a certain level of maximum reward and a certain level of maximum risk. This is so nice to show visually, but I don't have my pen. Dang it. But essentially, you would calculate what is the maximum reward that this play could achieve. All right. And then you calculate what is the maximum risk that this play could achieve. Again, I'm talking about realistically. Realistically. So with this, we'll say use this play because I like this one because this is so weird and out of the box. With this whole play that I did, the maximum reward that I could achieve is getting a pick, which happened. I killed the Widow. That was good. And baiting the whole team's attention back. So like if this Emre dropped off to chase me, if the Zen dropped off to chase me, and maybe the Juno even chases me with like a cooldown and a hazard chase me, that would probably be like maximum reward if they all give up their space. That didn't quite happen. I got a good chunk of that. I got their attention and I got the hazard to give up the space and I got the pick on the Widow. That was pretty good maximum reward. What is the maximum risk of this play? What is worst case scenario?
You die.
Yeah, I die. The hazard walls me off. The Zenyatta hits a crazy right click, something like that happens, and I die and I get staggered big time. Whole like 10, 15-second stagger. It would suck if that happened. But the question here is, and the big thing of this, we talked about it a little bit earlier, and what a good play is with a good play is where the potential for like the maximum reward outweighs the maximum risk, and by the most possible. So the maximum risk is I die. The maximum reward, though, is I get a pick and pull people back. Well, getting a kill versus dying, those things kind of cancel out, right? That's 1 for 1. Maybe slightly different, because obviously a Widow's worth slightly less than a tank, but when we weigh in the fact that there's a potential for baiting out all these people, the potential for reward is significantly higher than the potential for risk. And you will find that pattern a lot, especially with dive characters, where you're playing fairly independently, because generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, when you make a play, no matter how risky it is, the worst that can usually happen is you die. That's usually the worst that can happen. But there's oftentimes a lot more potential for achieving more. Maybe you get 2 picks. Maybe you get a pick and bait attention. Maybe you bait 3 people to chase you back into their spawn room but die for it, but your team wins the fight because of it. So something that I get at the end is that I encourage taking risky plays. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to talk about how to calculate risk versus reward. Before I get into that, are there any questions about understanding potential risk, potential rewards, and realizing these risks versus rewards?
Good.
Nope. Good.
I actually have to add one thing on that before I move on. So I talked earlier about like maximum reward outweighing maximum risk, right? But essentially what we're looking for is the biggest possible delta, the difference between those two things, right? If a play only has a little bit more reward, maximum reward than maximum risk, that play is still good, but it's not as good as a play that has significantly greater maximum reward versus maximum risk. Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah.
we're looking for the play that has the biggest difference, or it has the most reward versus the least risk. So let's talk about calculating risk versus reward and how you do this. So to calculate risk versus reward, the first thing is consider the possible rewards that the play will result in. Think about it. Think about if I dive this Ana, I could kill her, and maybe I could bait the other support back to heal her. Maybe I could bait a DPS back to help them. Those are possible rewards that could occur. I'm going to force out some cooldowns. Possible risks this play will result in. Well, if I dive the Ana, I could get slept, and that would suck. I could die. I got my bubble forced. I probably will get my bubble forced actually to avoid the sleep, so that's not great. My teammates could lose the fight up in the front because I'm not there to help them anymore. That's not great. So you gotta consider those. Consider what the possible rewards are, what the possible risks are, then weigh the probability of it succeeding based on the sources of risk. So that's mainly what we're thinking about. The sources of reward you don't really think about too much in game because, again, they're just how good's your plan, how will they execute it. That's kind of more of a hindsight thing. It's more of a thing you do in VOD review, not really in the game. So in the game, you're just thinking about what the sources of risk are. So if we're talking about still this jumping Ana example, well, Ana is a walking source of risk. She's got her sleep dart and she's got her anti-nade, and both are huge sources of risk to you. So you gotta weigh those. Gotta weigh what are the odds of me getting slept? If I get slept, what are the odds I die? How close are the enemy team to peel for the Ana? How far is my team to help me? Does my Kiriko have Suzu to save me? Is my Reaper gonna engage with me on this? You gotta weigh those sorts of things. And then, after all that is said and done, weigh the difference in max reward versus max risk of that play. And then you do this all again, multiple times, until you find the play that gives the largest delta, that gives the highest risk versus lowest reward. And all that sounds super duper complicated to do mid-game, and it is, but you are doing it constantly. You might not realize it, You might realize it, might be thinking about it, you might not be thinking about it, but it is happening in your brain. It's just doing it very, very poorly because it has about 2 seconds to do it every single time. And when you're weighing things that are this complicated, making those calculations multiple times for multiple different plays in 2 seconds is impossible to do effectively. But what we're going to get into now is ways that we can make this a little bit more effective, make it a little bit easier to succeed at this. So this is mostly done subconsciously already. Like I said, you guys are doing this constantly and you don't realize it. But it's a lot better if you're paying attention to it. So if you're able to, before you go on a play, if you're able to consciously, even if you can't think about every single thing, but if you can think like, what is the biggest source of risk here? And like, how likely is that thing to happen? If you can just even just do that, just that simple little bit, then it's going to dramatically increase your ability to make accurate risk versus reward calculations. But then the big thing I want to give you guys is, I want to give you guys a checklist of things to go over. And this is actually already pinned in the resources channel. So take a look at that and kind of reference it as needed. But that checklist is HP, which is both your HP and the enemy's HP. Mainly the enemy who you're targeting's HP, but the rest of the team's HP as well, but especially your own HP. Cooldowns, both your own cooldowns and the enemy's cooldowns again. So you need to weigh, do I have a mobility cooldown to escape from this position? You also need to weigh, does their Bastion have turret form to melt me in 1 second if I'm in the position? You need to evaluate how much pressure the enemies are likely to give you. So again, if you jump in on the back line, how likely is it for them to peel for you? Are they too far away that they couldn't help? Or are they right there where it's just they have to just do a quick 180 and they're on you? Evaluate how much assistance your team will give you. Do you have a Kiriko conveniently on the angle with you who's going to pocket you? Or do you have an Ana Brig who are fighting for their life in the back line? Very different scenarios for how much help you're going to get from your team. Consider the consequences of the space that you give up, right? So if I am going to push in on the right side from main, that's going to weaken main. So now the enemy team could push down main potentially and could damage my backline. And so that's a risk you have to consider. You have to consider enemies pushing off angles, right? So if I am going to push down main instead, well, what if the tracer pushes down that right side that I'm not occupying anymore? That's something you have to consider. And then lastly is consider other plans, which is what I was saying earlier, where we're trying to think about the plan that has the highest risk, or sorry, highest reward to lowest risk. And so that may mean that you come up with one good plan, or one plan that you think is good, but maybe you try and look for something even better. And that whole checklist there, that is in order of most to the least important things to consider. So if you are trying to work on improving your risk versus reward calculations, which is something that you should actively be working on, it should be a thing that's in your list of things to practice. When you're starting out, focus on HP. Think about HP until you're so good at thinking about HP that you think about HP subconsciously. You don't have to think about it. You just always know what your health is, and you're always weighing that in your risk versus reward calculations. Then think about cooldowns until you're, again, so good at that subconscious, and so on down the list until you get to the highest level concepts of thinking about enemies pushing different angles and stuff like that, which is really complex stuff that takes a while to get good at. And then one last little tip on how to help apply this in game. It's going to help a lot, especially in elos like below, honestly, like I'm not even gonna say below GM. I'm gonna say below like professional level. So any elo that any of us are realistically ever gonna play in is that you can take the first few fights to find patterns that the enemies do, and then build those patterns in to your risk versus reward calculations. And what I mean by specifically is that the enemy team is very likely to have bad habits. Specific players in enemy teams are likely to have bad habits that you can capitalize on. So what you look for a lot is like, if I pressure that Mercy, is she always gonna GA to a teammate and fly straight in the air? Mercy mains love to do that. And so if you can bait her to do that and you have a Widowmaker, well, you gave her Widowmaker a free headshot. Nice. Or if you know that the enemy Reaper if you're playing like Winston, they love to do this. Reapers love to do this. If you're playing Winston, if you jump in on a high ground, the Reaper always like just autopilots, presses E and TPs to you no matter what. Well, great. Now I can bait him into stupid positions for him and jump on his backline. Great. And so you try to look for these habits that the enemy team has. And you can kind of, rather than build in like, well, maybe they'll do it, you can be almost guaranteed that they're going to do it. So take the first couple fights to observe the enemy team, see what habits they have, and then plan your risk versus reward calculations around that. Plan around the Reaper TPing to you. Plan around the Mercy GAing straight in the air. Plan around those things. So that is everything that I have to go over first versus reward. I'm glad I got to re-record this one. Before we end it here, does anybody have any questions about this? The whole concept.
I'm good on questions.
I suppose the only thing it's not really a question. It starts to get a little more nuanced, but like
for it.
how you might do risk reward based on your team comp and based on your enemy's team comp, and how particular plays may factor differently within different team comps.
Okay, I'll help us with different comps.
I think you understand my question, right?
I think so. So you're saying like, well, maybe you can give me an example actually, because
So,
I don't
like,
want to speak without knowing
okay,
for sure.
so like obviously playing in this group with like, for instance, you're playing with Brig Mercy. Well, they have no ranged heals except for Brig Pack, and Brig Pack's range is not great. But like,
Yeah.
if you had like an Ana Zen backline, they would have way more range of healing. So as long as you had LOS, your dive or lack of dive would be factored differently because you would have more support from your supports, for instance.
Yeah. Hi, Nair. You're here right at the end, but that's all right. You've already heard this one, actually, I think. But yes, that is a good point. That is a good point. That would kind of be bundled under some other things, but I guess I didn't make it clear enough. But that is true. Especially for support comps, like you're getting at. But your team comp does pretty dramatically change what kind of plays you could do versus what you couldn't do. So a big thing is like if you're playing Pharah, for instance, or any DPS, but especially Pharah, you can play very differently with a Mercy Pocket than without a Mercy Pocket. You can be way more aggressive. You can play way deeper angles. You can take way riskier 1v1s, or duels, I should say. So it does dramatically change things. And yes, that is something that you should consider in your risk versus reward calculations. That would kind of fall under the categories of like, how far are you from your teammates? How much can your teammates help you here? But you're right. That probably should be an extra category that's included, is weighing what your team comp is and what ways they could help you, or what ways they'd be a hindrance to you. If you want to go really fast, but you have a slow big old brig lumbering around the backline, that's going to be a hindrance to you. Yeah, that's a good point. Glad you brought that up.
Okay.
Is there any other questions?
Let me know when you want.
And there, what we were just talking about today is we were just going over risk versus reward again. So you were already here for the first lecture, so this is just a re-recording of it.
Okay, sounds good.
I think that we're good on
Do you
this.
want me to
So
stop
if you want to end the
recording?
record.
Okay.